The gentle clink of ceramic mugs and the hiss of the espresso machine filled the air as Usha Vance glanced at her watch. 3 more hours until she needed to be at the fundraiser dinner, just enough time to review her notes and gather her thoughts. As the wife of a prominent public figure, these moments of solitude had become increasingly rare, little islands of calm in an ocean of scrutiny and expectations. She took a sip of her tea, letting the warmth seep through her. The coffee shop was her secret refuge, not so upscale that someone would expect to find her here, but charming enough with its mismatched furniture and local artwork that she felt comfortable. Here, she wasn't Usha Vance, the public figure. She was just another patron seeking caffeine in a quiet corner. That's when she heard it, a muffled sob from the booth behind her. So quiet that had there been more than a handful of customers, it would have been lost in the ambient noise. But in the mid-afternoon lull, the sound cut through with startling clarity. Usha shifted slightly, not wanting to intrude, but unable to ignore the raw emotion in that single sound. Through the small gap between the booth and the wall, she caught a glimpse of a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, hunched over a laptop, one hand covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. There was something about her that struck Usha immediately, a familiar determination even in distress. The young woman wiped her tears with the sleeve of her worn cardigan, then straightened her shoulders and tried to focus on the screen before her, only for another wave of silent tears to overcome her moments later. In another life, Usha might have simply turned away, respecting the privacy of a stranger's pain. But something about today, perhaps the rare sense of anonymity, or maybe just human compassion, made her pause. Sometimes the universe places you exactly where you need to be, even if you don't realize it at the time. "Excuse me," Usha said softly, turning in her seat. "I don't mean to intrude, but are you all right?" The young woman's head snapped up, eyes widening with embarrassment as she hastily wiped away her tears. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the kind of response people give when they're anything but fine. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you." "You didn't," Usha assured her, offering a gentle smile. Sometimes it helps to talk to a stranger. No judgment, no history, just a listening ear. For a moment, the young woman seemed ready to retreat further into herself. But then something shifted in her expression, perhaps the recognition that bottling everything up wasn't working anymore. "I just found out I didn't get the scholarship," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working 2 jobs, taking extra classes, maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and it still wasn't enough." She gestured at her laptop. "I was just writing an email to withdraw from my program. I can't afford the next semester without that scholarship." Usha felt a pang in her chest. How many dreams had been deferred or abandoned because of financial constraints? How many brilliant minds had society lost because the path forward was blocked by something as arbitrary as money? "What are you studying?" Usha asked. "Environmental law," the young woman replied, a flicker of passion momentarily overriding her despair. "I grew up in a town where the local river was polluted by a manufacturing plant. People got sick for years before anyone did anything about it. I promised myself I'd make sure that wouldn't happen to other communities." There was such conviction in her voice that Usha could almost see it, the determined child who had witnessed injustice and instead of accepting it, had decided to fight. It reminded Usha of herself at that age, before life had grown more complicated, when the path between right and wrong seemed clearer. "My name is Usha," she offered, deliberately omitting her last name. "Zoe," the young woman replied, offering a small watery smile. "And really, I'm fine. Just having a moment. I'll figure something out." But the resignation in her voice told a different story. This wasn't just a setback. It was the crumbling of a dream that had sustained her through countless late nights and early mornings. Usha made a decision then, one of those split-second choices that can alter the trajectory of lives. "Would you mind if I joined you for a few minutes?" she asked. "I'd like to hear more about your studies." Zoe looked surprised but nodded, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. As Usha gathered her things and moved to the other booth, she noticed the scattered textbooks and highlighted articles on environmental precedents. Despite her distress, Zoe's workspace was meticulously organized. the mark of someone who couldn't afford to waste time or resources. I was reading about the Morrison versus Ecotech case last week, Usha said as she settled into the seat. It's fascinating how they established municipal liability for groundwater contamination. Zoe's eyes widened with surprise and interest. You follow environmental law? I have a passing familiarity, Usha replied with a small smile. In truth, she had helped review several amicus briefs on that very case, but that would give away too much about her identity. What's your take on the ruling? For the next 20 minutes, Zoe spoke with growing animation about the case's implications, her tears forgotten, as she navigated the complex legal and ethical questions with remarkable insight. Usha asked questions that pushed Zoe's analysis further, watching as the young woman's natural intelligence and deep knowledge shone through. You know, Usha said during a pause in the conversation, you speak about these issues with more clarity than many practicing attorneys I've met. Zoe flushed with pleasure at the compliment, but then reality seemed to crash back in. Well, it doesn't really matter now, does it? All the passion in the world doesn't pay tuition. What would you do? Usha asked carefully. If money wasn't an obstacle, what would your next steps be? Finish my degree, clerk for Judge Ramirez. She's been pivotal in environmental justice cases, and then work with the Public Interest Environmental Law Foundation. Zoe's answer came without hesitation, a path clearly visualized and longed for. They take on cases for communities that can't afford representation against corporate polluters. Usha nodded, feeling something settling into place in her mind. That's a worthy path. It was a worthy path, Zoe corrected, the spark in her eyes dimming again. She glanced at her laptop screen, where the withdrawal email sat waiting to be sent. I guess I'll have to find another way to make a difference. Usha looked at her watch. The fundraiser dinner would begin in a few hours, an event where wealthy donors would gather to support educational initiatives. The irony wasn't lost on her that she would be in a room where people would commit more to a single meal than what might save this young woman's education. Zoe, Usha said, making another split-second decision, would you mind giving me your email address? I have a contact at the Westridge Foundation who might be interested in your work. They offer mid-semester emergency grants for students in your situation. It wasn't entirely true. She had no specific contact in mind, but she sat on the board of several educational foundations and knew the pathways to create opportunities when necessary. Hope flickered across Zoe's face, quickly tempered by what looked like years of learned caution. That's very kind of you, but no promises, Usha said quickly. But your passion and intellect deserve a chance. Sometimes we need a bridge to get from one shore to another. Zoe hesitated, then wrote her email address on a napkin. Thank you, she said simply, for listening, even if nothing comes from the contact. Usha tucked the napkin into her purse, knowing with certainty that something would indeed come from this chance encounter. As she prepared to leave, she paused, struck by the weight of the moment. You know, Zoe, the most effective advocates I've known are those who understand both the law and the human cost behind the cases. Whatever happens, don't lose that connection between the two. As Usha walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright afternoon sun, she felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with the evening's fundraiser. Some might call it fate or coincidence that had placed her in that particular cafe at that exact moment, but Usha preferred to think of it as an opportunity, one that she had chosen to recognize and act upon. Little did she know that this brief encounter would ripple outward in ways neither woman could possibly imagine. That evening, as the chandelier light bounced off crystal glasses and polite laughter filled the air of the banquet hall, Usha found her thoughts returning to the coffee shop. The contrast between Zoe's reality and this fundraiser was stark. Here, people spoke about educational opportunity while sipping $100 wine. There, a promising student was about to abandon her dreams because of a financial gap that would seem insignificant to most people in this room. You seem distracted tonight, her husband murmured as they moved between conversation circles, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. I met someone today, Usha replied quietly, a law student, brilliant, passionate, about to drop out because she lost her scholarship. He raised an eyebrow, recognizing the tone in his wife's voice. After years together, he knew when Usha had found a cause that resonated with her. "And you're thinking about how to help?" "I'm thinking about how arbitrary it all is," she said. "Who succeeds and who doesn't? How many others are there like her? One financial setback, and years of work just evaporate." Before he could respond, they were drawn into another conversation, but the seed had been planted. Throughout the evening, as Usha discussed the Foundation's initiatives with potential donors, she found herself speaking with renewed conviction about educational accessibility. By the end of the night, she had secured several substantial commitments, including one specifically for emergency scholarships for students facing unexpected financial hardship. Back in the quiet of their hotel room, Usha opened her laptop. She could have delegated this task to an assistant tomorrow, but something about her encounter with Zoe felt personal. This wasn't about charity or a public relations opportunity. This was about recognizing potential and removing arbitrary barriers. She drafted an email to the Foundation's Scholarship Committee, outlining a proposal for an emergency grant program. Then, she sent a separate message to Zoe. "I've spoken with my contacts," she wrote, carefully choosing her words. "There's an emergency grant opportunity that you should apply for. I've attached the details and deadlines. I believe your work is exactly what they're looking to support." She hesitated before signing the email. Until now, Zoe had no idea who she really was. Would revealing her full identity change the dynamic of their interaction? Would it make her gesture seem like a celebrity's random act of kindness rather than a genuine response to Zoe's merit? In the end, she signed it simply Usha V. With her Foundation email address, enough that Zoe could discover the truth if she looked, but not making it the focus of their interaction. Across town, in a small studio apartment shared with two other students, Zoe was sitting cross-legged on her bed, staring at her laptop screen. The withdrawal email was still there, unsent, a cursor blinking at the end of the message like a countdown to the end of her ambitions. Her encounter with the kind stranger named Usha had provided a momentary distraction, but reality had settled back in during her evening shift at the diner. She had 3 months of rent saved, barely enough to sustain her while looking for full-time work if she dropped out now. If she waited until the tuition deadline passed, she'd have nothing. The ping of an incoming email broke her concentration. Seeing the unfamiliar address, her first instinct was to ignore it, probably another credit card offer or marketing message. But the subject line caught her eye. "Regarding our conversation at Meridian Coffee." Zoe clicked it open, her heartbeat quickening as she read. An emergency grant for students in her exact situation? The application deadline was just 3 days away, but the requirements matched her qualifications precisely. For a brief moment, suspicion clouded her judgment. Things like this didn't just happen. People didn't walk into coffee shops and change strangers' lives. She hesitated, then Googled the foundation mentioned in the email. It was legitimate. More than legitimate, it was prestigious. Then, almost as an afterthought, she Googled Usha Vai Foundation. The search results made her breath catch. Photos of the woman from the coffee shop appeared immediately, but in these images, she was at galas and formal events, often standing beside her husband, one of the most influential men in the country. "Oh my God," Zoe whispered to herself, the realization dawning that she had poured out her heart to Usha Vance, whose connections and influence could indeed make the scholarship opportunity real. Her roommate Maria looked up from her textbook. "What is it?" I think I just got a lifeline," Zoe said, her voice trembling slightly. "That woman I told you about from the coffee shop, she's Usha Vance." Maria's eyes widened. "As in, the Usha Vance. What was she doing in our neighborhood coffee shop?" "I don't know," Zoe said, scrolling through the application requirements with newfound determination. "But she just sent me information about an emergency grant that could save my enrollment." "That's... wow," Maria said, clearly struggling to process this turn of events. "Are you going to apply?" Zoe was already opening a new document, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I have 3 days to put together the best application of my life." For the next 72 hours, Zoe barely slept. She refined her personal statement, gathered supporting documents from professors, and compiled a portfolio of her research and advocacy work. Each word felt crucial, each attachment a potential deciding factor. This wasn't just about staying in school anymore. It was about proving that Usha's faith in her wasn't misplaced. When she finally submitted the application, clicking send at 3:47 a.m. on the deadline day, Zoe felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Whether or not she received the grant, someone had seen her, truly seen her, and believed her ambitions were worth fighting for. She sent a brief thank you email to Usha, expressing gratitude for the opportunity regardless of the outcome. She didn't expect a response. People like Usha Vance probably received hundreds of messages a day. But at 7:30 that morning, as Zoe was finally drifting off to sleep, her phone chimed with a new email. "Talent and determination like yours deserve a chance to flourish," Usha had written. "I'll be following your career with interest, Zoe. The world needs advocates who understand both the law and the heart behind it." As morning light filtered through her thin curtains, Zoe fell asleep with a sense of possibility that had seemed unimaginable just days before. One chance encounter, one moment of kindness, had reopened doors she thought were permanently closed. 2 weeks later, Usha was reviewing foundation documents in her office when her assistant mentioned that the emergency grant committee had finalized their selections. She resisted the urge to immediately ask about Zoe. She had been careful not to directly influence the committee's decision-making process, wanting the young woman to succeed on her own merits. Still, she found herself holding her breath slightly as her assistant handed her the list of recipients. There, third from the top, Zoe Martinez. A small smile played across Usha's lips. She had expected this outcome. Zoe's application had undoubtedly been exceptional, but seeing the confirmation brought a profound sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about one student. It was about what that student might accomplish if given the chance to fulfill her potential. The committee was particularly impressed with Ms. Martinez's environmental justice research, her assistant noted, following Usha's gaze to the name. Apparently, she's already done significant community mapping work correlating corporate pollution sites with income and health disparities. "Is that so?" Usha replied, feigning only casual interest despite the pride she felt for this young woman she barely knew. "When will the recipients be notified?" "The emails are going out this afternoon. The formal letters will follow next week." Usha nodded, returning to her documents. She wouldn't reach out to Zoe directly. That would be inappropriate now that the formal process was underway. But she made a mental note to return to Meridian Coffee sometime soon. Perhaps their paths would cross again. Across town, Zoe's phone buzzed during her environmental ethics seminar. Normally, she would never check messages during class, but something made her glance down. The email preview on her lock screen made her heart stop. Foundation Emergency Grant Committee, application status update. Her hand trembled slightly as she excused herself from the classroom. In the empty hallway, she leaned against the wall and opened the email, scanning quickly for the words that would determine her future. "We are pleased to inform you." Zoe pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling the sob that threatened to escape. The grant would cover her remaining tuition and provide a stipend for living expenses through the end of the academic year. She wouldn't have to drop out. She wouldn't have to abandon her dream. Before returning to class, she sent a quick message to her mother, the woman who had worked double shifts for years to support Zoe's education, who had taught her that persistence was as important as intelligence. "Mom, I got it. I can stay in school. Call you tonight. I love you." That evening, as Zoe explained the miracle that had occurred, meeting Usha Vance, learning about the grant, being selected, her mother listened in teary-eyed silence. "You see," her mother finally said, "this is why I always told you to keep going. The universe puts the right people in your path when you need them most." "It wasn't just luck, Mom," Zoe insisted. "She didn't just hand me the money. She pointed me toward an opportunity, but I still had to earn it." "Of course you did," her mother agreed. "But someone had to open the door before you could walk through it. Don't discount the kindness of strangers, Zoe. Someday, you'll be in a position to open doors for others." The words stayed with Zoe in the weeks that followed. As she threw herself back into her studies with renewed vigor, she began to see her future role differently. Yes, she would fight for environmental justice through legal channels, But she would also look for those moments, those opportunities to extend a hand to others, as Usha had done for her. 3 months after receiving the grant, Zoe was presenting her research at a university symposium when she spotted Usha in the audience. Their eyes met briefly, and Usha offered a small, encouraging nod. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. I see you. I believe in you. Keep going. That silent encouragement fueled Zoe through the rest of her presentation, which received the symposium's highest honors. Afterward, as colleagues and professors congratulated her, she searched the crowd for Usha, but the woman had already gone. In her mailbox the next day, Zoe found a handwritten note on heavy cream stationery. Your presentation was exceptional. You spoke not just with knowledge, but with conviction, and that combination is rare and valuable. The Foundation Board has expressed interest in creating a summer fellowship program for environmental law students working with underserved communities. I thought you might have insights to offer as we develop the parameters. If you're interested, my contact information is below. UV. Zoe read the note 3 times, each reading revealing new possibilities. This wasn't charity, it was collaboration. Usha wasn't just helping her stay in school, she was inviting her to help create opportunities for others. That weekend, Zoe returned to Meridian Coffee and sat in the same booth where she had cried over her scholarship rejection months earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on her as she drafted an email to Usha with her thoughts on the fellowship program. She suggested focusing on students from communities directly impacted by environmental injustice, creating a pipeline for advocates with lived experience. She outlined potential partnerships with grassroots organizations and metrics for measuring community impact beyond legal victories. As she wrote, Zoe realized she was no longer thinking like a struggling student, but like someone who could shape policy and create change. The transformation wasn't just about financial security, it was about understanding her own capacity to influence systems that had once seemed impenetrable. When she finished the email, Zoe remained at the booth, watching other patrons come and go. How many of them were one conversation away from a life-changing opportunity? How many had the potential to do remarkable things if only someone would notice them, believe in them, open a door? A young man at a nearby table was frantically erasing and rewriting math equations, frustration evident in every movement. Without overthinking it, Zoe approached him. Calculus? She asked. He nodded, looking up with the wariness of someone unaccustomed to strangers initiating conversation. I used to tutor that course, she said. I have some time if you want another perspective. The young man hesitated, then slid the textbook toward her. I'd appreciate that. I'm Elijah. I'm Zoe, she replied, sitting down. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes makes all the difference. As she began explaining the concept he was struggling with, Zoe felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with Usha's kindness was continuing through her own actions. Not in the same way, perhaps, but with the same fundamental recognition. Everyone deserves to be seen, to be given a chance to fulfill their potential. 3 years later, Zoe stood in her graduation gown, her mother beaming beside her as photographers captured the moment. The journey from that tearful day in the coffee shop to this triumph had been challenging but transformative. She had not only completed her degree with honors, but had also established a community-based environmental monitoring program that was now being replicated in 7 states. As the graduates dispersed after the ceremony, Zoe spotted a familiar figure standing quietly near a pillar, away from the crowds. Usha Vance, elegant as always, offered a warm smile as their eyes met. You came, Zoe said, making her way through the throng of families and friends. I wouldn't have missed it, Usha replied. Though I hope you don't mind my keeping a low profile. Today should be about you and your accomplishments, not about who might be in attendance. My mother would love to meet you, Zoe said. She still talks about you as if you're a guardian angel who appeared out of nowhere. Usha laughed softly. Hardly an angel, just someone who recognized a kindred spirit. As Zoe introduced Usha to her mother, she watched the 2 women embrace as if they were old friends, rather than strangers, meeting for the first time. There was something powerful in witnessing the connection between the woman who had raised her with unwavering faith in her potential and the woman who had helped her realize it. Thank you, her mother said simply, holding Usha's hands in her own. Not just for the grant, but for seeing my daughter when she needed to be seen. The grant was the easy part, Usha replied. The work, the dedication, the resilience, that was all Zoe. Later, as they shared a celebratory dinner at a small restaurant near campus, Usha handed Zoe an envelope. This isn't a graduation gift exactly, she explained, more of an invitation. Inside was a letter from Judge Ramirez, the very judge Zoe had once mentioned wanting to clerk for that day in the coffee shop. The letter offered her a clerkship position starting in the fall. Did you? Zoe began. I merely mentioned your name, Usha said. The judge was already familiar with your work through the fellowship program. The choice was entirely hers. Zoe's mother wiped away tears as Zoe read the letter aloud. The position was everything she had dreamed of, a stepping stone that would position her perfectly for the environmental justice career she had envisioned. I don't know how to thank you, Zoe said, looking up from the letter. You don't need to, Usha replied, but if you truly want to show gratitude, there is something you can do. Anything, Zoe said immediately. Remember that coffee shop, Usha said. Remember what it feels like to be on the edge of giving up and then finding a way forward. Throughout your career, you'll encounter people at similar crossroads. Some will be obvious, clients fighting for their communities, young students like yourself. Others will be less visible, the administrative assistant staying late to finish a brief because they dream of law school, the community organizer who has brilliant insights but no formal education. See them, create pathways. That's how you thank me. Zoe nodded, understanding the profound simplicity of this request. It wasn't about repaying a debt. It was about perpetuating a cycle of opportunity and recognition. There's something else, Usha continued, her tone shifting slightly. A proposal I'd like your input on. She outlined a new initiative, a nationwide mentorship program connecting established professionals with promising students from underrepresented backgrounds. Unlike traditional mentorship programs that focus solely on career advancement, this one would include emergency financial support, mental health resources, and community building components. The foundation has the infrastructure, Usha explained. What we need is insight from someone who has recently navigated these challenges, someone who understands both the practical hurdles and the emotional toll of pursuing ambitious goals without a safety net. You want me to help design it? Zoe asked, catching the implication. I want you to co-chair the development committee, Usha clarified. Your voice would be equal to those of people who have been in philanthropy for decades. It would require time and commitment, but it could impact thousands of students facing situations similar to yours. Zoe glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. When do we start? She asked. 6 months later, Zoe stood at a podium in the grand hall of the same foundation that had provided her emergency grant. Before her sat 200 of the country's most influential philanthropists, educators, and business leaders. Beside her stood Usha, who had just introduced her to the audience. 3 years ago, I was ready to abandon my education and my dreams, Zoe began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Not because I lacked ability or determination, but because of financial circumstances beyond my control. I was one of the lucky ones. I found a lifeline through the Foundation's emergency grant program. But for every student like me who finds support, dozens more quietly disappear from classrooms, their potential never fully realized. She outlined the mentorship initiative, sharing data on student attrition rates and the economic impact of educational barriers. She spoke about the emotional toll of financial insecurity and the transformative power of having someone who believes in your potential. As she concluded her presentation, Zoe looked directly at Usha. A single conversation in a coffee shop changed the trajectory of my life. Not because someone rescued me, but because someone saw value in ensuring I had the opportunity to rescue myself. This initiative is about creating those moments of recognition and opportunity on a scale that could transform our educational landscape. The room erupted in applause, and commitments for funding began pouring in immediately. By the end of the evening, the initiative had secured enough support to launch in 50 cities across the country. Later, as the crowd thinned, Usha found Zoe standing quietly by a window, looking out at the city lights. So, Usha said, joining her, how does it feel to be on this side of things? Zoe considered the question carefully. It feels like completing a circle, she said finally, but also like the beginning of something much larger. Usha nodded, understanding perfectly. That's how lasting change happens, I think. One circle completing and expanding to form another. One person seeing another, who then sees someone else. I keep thinking about that day in the coffee shop, Zoe admitted. What if you had chosen a different cafe? What if you had ignored my crying? What if you had offered sympathy but nothing more? We could question 1,000 what-ifs, Usha replied. Or we can simply be grateful that in this particular reality, two people who needed to meet did meet. And now, thousands of others will find the support they need because of that meeting. As they rejoined the remaining guests, Zoe felt a profound sense of purpose and connection. The path from a tearful student in a coffee shop to an advocate helping shape national educational policy had been unexpected and challenging. But standing here now, she understood that her journey wasn't just about personal success. It was about becoming a link in a chain of opportunity that would extend far beyond anything she could imagine.